Welcome to Octane Nights 2025. Show doesn't start until about 2. It's about 11 o'clock in the morning now. There's a lot of people here already. This is just the beginning of where they close off the street, starting at 2 o'clock, going through 10. See what kind of show we have this year. We managed to get our parking spot here in the Marks parking lot. When I pulled in, I thought, there aren't any Dodges here. But that's okay. These are the people I'm parked next to. This is Bob's car. Bob actually built that from pieces of car. It's a Ford Anglia. Oh, and now there's another Dodge here with us. It's only 11 o'clock in the morning. Show doesn't start until 2, runs till 10. They shut down the whole street from downtown through to the highway. Quite a lot here to see. This is only a tiny part of it.
So here's going to be where we switch over to a after-the-fact commentary. Basically, there was too much noise, particularly copyrighted music in the background, just being played at every section of the show. The city set up loudspeakers so they can send out the music, and that's great for the event itself, but it's bad for trying to make a YouTube video. You can kind of see in the background, this is the road earlier in the day when it was just my dad there. He was there about midday, and you can see cars kind of cruising the area, trying to figure out where they were going to park for the show itself. This is a mid-weekday show. This year was on August 6th, which was a Wednesday. So this show is very interesting because it started out as a memorial cruise sponsored by Mongoose Motors, which is a local car builder in Ravenna. And it kind of grew year on year. It originally started as just the customers of Mongoose Motors coming out to memorialize a friend, and it has grown into a show that draws thousands of cars and tens of thousands of people. They don't have the numbers still for 2025, but the numbers they put out from 24 were about 5,000 cars and 18 to 22,000 people in attendance. And the interesting part is they managed to avoid truly shutting down the downtown Ravenna until the evening, which is no small feat. What you're seeing here is the front row at Mongoose Motorsports, and while it has grown beyond them as far as sponsors, they are still the preeminent sponsor of this event. You'll see throughout the entire show, not just their front row and parking lot, a bunch of little placards that say that they are a customer car for Mongoose Motorsports. And it's very interesting the caliber of car as well as the variety of car that they have here. As you can see in the background, we have quite a rare Dodge, being that it is a dual quad setup on a early 60s model. I'll kind of go through a variety of the cars in greater detail as we go on, but I'm just kind of showing what they had in the beginning. As you can see here, there aren't just significant restoration cars, there are also a variety of cars built for any kind of reasons. This particular one is a serious drag car setup with some interesting mishmashes of parts. Velocity stacks and EFI are kind of an odd combination, but I'm sure it works very well at the drag strip. As you can see, the car also has quite extensive safety implements like the cage, and it's mini-tubbed in the back, and a variety of other quite significant modifications made to the car. Moving beyond that, you can see that a lot of the local businesses have opened their parking lots as well as sponsored this event. Just to kind of list off some of the big local ones. Summit Racing, obviously one of the biggest, and while they are not local to Ravenna, they're local to Northeast Ohio and sponsor a lot of these local events. In addition, our local mid-range bank, being hometown, and a variety of other sponsors. One interesting one I found was Buckeye Skips, which is a organization that is attempting to establish a drag weekend event that will be happening here in October, actually in a few days from the point of recording, unfortunately, we weren't able to get ourselves or our vehicles together enough to do that event. Hoping to do that next year. I'd have to, start by building a drag car, but we have a few things that could fit into that particular niche, but that is for the future. You can see that this event is truly anything from OBS Chevy trucks to Corvettes to old Fords and really everything in between. Weird statues too, as you can see in the background. A lot of local businesses use this event to get some free PR or some paid PR if they're sponsors, but it's really open to the community in a way that a lot of these big car shows are not. And the city of Ravenna really takes advantage of that. They do everything they can to provide policing, bathrooms, just everything they can do to make sure this event stays and grows, which I find very admirable. A lot of local municipalities don't tend to do that. You'll see in our next video that Buckeye Lake, which is the local community around Mopar Nationals, has chosen not to do that for their local shows, which is unfortunate because they did in the past. So now we're going to get into the actual walkthrough on the show itself. Right now you can see we're starting down at Haas Auto Mall, which is on the far end of Ravenna, really the end of the city. And you can see there's a very interesting wide variety of cars. A lot of these are customs, fair few restored, and some late model stuff, as you can see there with the Mustang convertible. It's really just a hodgepodge, and there isn't any kind of segregation for classes or any of that like you see at a lot of other shows. Big one that we do is the Stan Hewitt show, which has a lot of that. You can see even like that Ford Ranger there came coated in mud, which is interesting. Now, as we kind of get into the individual cars themselves, here's one of our favorites from the show. This was owned by a local guy that actually had several other cars at the show, including some of the ones next to it. But here we have a 1971 Plymouth Duster 340 car. This car was quite extreme in its restoration, down to things you wouldn't necessarily think of, including reproduction Mopar floor mats, which is entertaining. But you can see it's a automatic car, automatic on the column with a bench seat, very nicely upholstered. Graphics running up and down the sides as well as the tail panel. And one thing that kind of bugged my dad during this was you can see that it even has the factory correct tailpipes that we spent quite a bit of time searching for. In a moment, you're going to be able to see another interior shot and see the new production Mopar floor mats. But you can also see that the dash has been restored quite exceptionally down to a factory functional radio, and under the hood is done as well. One of my favorite options on this car is the shark's tooth grille that is not very common with these A-bodies. Up next, we have a car that I actually find quite interesting, but a lot of people seem to hate. Certainly the one that I posted as a short got a lot of hate. This is a 73 or 74 Pontiac Ventura. This car was interesting. It was essentially Pontiac's take on a Nova, but it was actually relatively common to see these set up as performance cars. And in 1974, they actually went as far as slapping GTO on the side of them. In 73, they kind of had their last hurrah with the mid-size GTO in the Colonnade body style. And for whatever reason, they decided to move the GTO from that platform to the smaller Nova platform, which is interesting because there was always the Pontiac Firebird essentially on the same platform, and there wasn't really a reason to have two performance cars on the same platform. Consequently, you saw in 1975 they just dropped the GTO name entirely, but I still find these cars to be fairly interesting, and they actually don't look too bad in my opinion. Here we have another car that I find interesting, but a lot of people might not. This is a 1977 Chevy Caprice Classic. In my opinion, kind of one of the last proper full-size GM cars. Certainly one of the last full-size GM cars that you could get in a two-door, My dad took a long video and a bunch of pictures of this because my mother had a 1979 Impala while she was in college, and both of them really liked these cars. She very much so enjoyed driving it all year round because these are the epitome of a tank. Um, but it's just interesting looking at what they were replaced by, with the 1990s Caprices and Impalas even only coming in the great big bulbous four doors, which was unfortunate, but you get these whether they were Caprice or Impala in the two door, and this one is actually set up to be a relatively sporty looking car with the blue paint and the vinyl top.
And up next, we have the following generation of Caprice from the last one. And while I did throw a bit of shade on these cars earlier, I will say I do have a special place in my heart for one of these. When I was growing up, my mother had a 1996 SS Impala, which was a cool car, but was also a horrifically unreliable car. Um, and they are kind of the last full frame GM car. As you can see in the background, we're also kind of going through all of the other cars that are at the AutoZone of all places. And this kind of shows just the variety of cars that were here. Everything from expensive restored cars to kind of hot rodded out, less expensive 80s cars. Although these days, SS Monte Carlos are no longer cheap, which is unfortunate because they used to cost nothing. And with that, we'll move on to the next one. Here's a kind of up close view of that Caprice again, and I'll kind of get into some details about it. I really do like this version of Chevy Blue that these 90s cars came. It's not quite the same as prior iterations, but it is good nonetheless. And one thing I find very interesting about this car is it does still have an actual rumble seat, which is kind of showcasing how this is kind of the last of a dying breed as far as full size, full frame cars go. And it's very odd with these that the rumble seat only came in the old school vinyl when the rest of it has a newer cloth interior, but that's what they did at the time.
So, just to take a bit of a break from showcasing some of the cars that we saw here, I will point out from the video you can see, even later into the afternoon, people were coming and going. A lot of people tended to leave a bit early as the end of the show gets a bit hectic, but more people were arriving and cars were changing places the whole show, which was very nice to see. And as you can see, as things tended to draw on a bit, cars started getting a bit unique in their parking arrangements, with people getting to the point where they were parking on the grass through all of the back roads, not even just in the front yards of some of the businesses that were associated with the event. But it really kind of showcases that all of the car people from really the whole region of the state and several from other states had shown up to make this event something big. Here we have one of the more interesting rigs that we saw at the show. This is a early 60s GM truck that, as you could see earlier, was Cummins swapped. We didn't get a chance to track the guy down to talk to him, and I'll be honest, I don't know anything about Cummins engines, so other than they swapped a Cummins drivetrain into it, I don't know that much. But it was also towing a Buick G body that was quite the significant setup as drag car, as you can see there. Had a V8 swapped in, quite the turbo setup, and as we get around to the back here, you'll see in addition to all of that, it's got a bottle. Here we have a late year Chevy Vega, as you can see from the front end. These tend to mimic a lot of the Camaros of the same year. This one is set up rather interesting with a twin turbo LS setup with a high rise intake, and as that would entail, it is quite the significant drag car. Didn't get a chance to talk to the guy, but as you can see from the extensive cage and all of the other safety features, including a parachute, it's probably rated for something in the 8-second mark. Here we have a great example of a early Plymouth B body. This particular one is a satellite, and this was one thing that was very common at these shows, is these muscle cars, or proto muscle cars in this case, that are in excellent restored condition, but nothing all that crazy. This is just a simple big block car. They were fairly common. And the bucket seats and console, less so common, but nothing insane. We didn't get a chance to talk to the guy, but my assumption is that this is just a basic 383 car, and that was commonplace in the era. Here we have a 1979 Little Red Express truck. You can tell it's 79 based off of the double-decker headlights. This is a very interesting car. This was, in the year it was made, the fastest production car in the United States, which you would think is quite the achievement, but that's not really the case. I personally own a late 70s Corvette, and they're nothing to scoff at, and that was the primary competition. But that being said, these are a very cool truck, and you can see this one's been pretty heavily modified, lowered, and some wheel and tire changes. Here we have a great OBS Chevy truck. These trucks ran 88 to 03 depending on configurations, and they're really just, at least in my mind, the Chevy truck. I grew up in the back of one of these. My parents had, give or take 5 during the time I was growing up, and they're just a great end of the world truck. I mean, even in Northeast Ohio, you see these kicking around with 250, 300,000 miles like nothing. This particular one is pretty significantly lowered, and as far as I could tell, just that, but it's hard to see if there's anything else. Now, this next one is, to be honest, one of my favorite cars of all time, being an early GTO. This particular generation was really, in my eyes, the prime first muscle car, certainly the one that was culturally significant. There were plenty of others that came before it. And this generation isn't the most common, as it only ran from about 65 to 67. There was a 64, but it was a fair amount different. This particular car is in one of my favorite blues. That is very common in the GTO. And the car is overall in great shape, although you can tell from a variety of things that it is clearly a driver, not just a show car. Here we have a Willys World War II era Jeep, as well as some other cars that were kind of hidden away in the back of the show. These were off the main drag quite far, and it's just interesting to see the caliber of cars that were even stashed away in places that we didn't even get a chance to really look at. As you can see here, I'm kind of showing that it's behind all of the main buildings, and it's just not very often that you see a weekday cruise-in that is this big. Here we have another thing that you just don't see every day, being a Jeep rod. It's hard to tell because it's all very custom. Obviously, it has an early CJ5 front grille and a small block Chevy V8. It appears to be either a late CJ7 or a YJ tub on some kind of a custom chassis with a custom control arm front end with some coilovers, but fairly interesting. Definitely not something you see every day. And kind of getting back to some just general walking around in the show, one thing I'll point out that this clip shows off pretty well is that as the day got on, we kept seeing more and more cars show up, and specifically the ones that were showing up towards the end of the day was a lot of later model cars, clearly people that had driven them to work and come to the show. And it was interesting to see so many late model cars and even dating to extremely early cars at the same show, kind of showing off that this was really a free-for-all kind of show with anyone and everyone showing up. The one thing that it didn't really have a ton of was any kind of oddball supercar stuff. Not that I particularly find those things all that interesting, but I know some people do. But it was very interesting to see how this show gathered everybody into cars in the area, which, given that it's Northeast Ohio and there's so many drag strips and big names like Summit, Jegs, that's not all that surprising. But what is surprising is that they invade this little town of Ravenna and really take over so much. Here's one of the other Mopars that ended up parking in the same area as we did in the show. This is a much earlier Plymouth Duster. these really ran 70, 71, 72, and they are kind of the quintessential popular A-body at the moment. That and Demons that ran the same time period. This particular car is finished off in F8 green, which, to be honest, I like quite a bit, but I know a lot of people don't. That being said, the most interesting parts on it are that it is a V8 4-speed car, and I don't know if that's original, nor do I know if the wing or the decals are, but I know it is a very interesting car, and one that you don't see too much in that color. Here we have, in my opinion, the most interesting build that we saw at this particular show. This is an early 62-63 Plymouth Valiant, and it's not in too bad shape. The eagle-eyed people out there might have noticed something when I was looking at the front end. This is a big block car. Not a Dodge big block car, but a big block car nonetheless. It features a Chevy 454 in it and a manual transmission out of some flavor of Chevelle. When we talked to the owners, they didn't actually know what manual transmission they had swapped into it, but they ended up putting a big block in it and some other interesting things, like a hydro boost system for the brakes, as well as the front steering components out of a GM van. But essentially, they were able to put this together due to being able to buy the skeletal blocks that you can from Summit Racing, and they kind of just used that to be their guide and built probably a one-off car. And with that, we go to some more just general show action. As you can see, this is kind of getting late into the evening, and things didn't stop going. Timestamp I have on this is about 6:30 in the evening, and it didn't really seem to matter to any of the people there. You can also kind of see in the background there's some interesting cars. Got some new C8 Corvettes, which I hate with a burning passion, as well as a lot of interesting Japanese cars that I know nothing about because I'm not a Japanese car guy. But it kind of, once again, showcases just the variety of cars here, and there was something for everybody. Here we have a car that I found very interesting. This is a late year Colonnade El Camino. This is a 76, 77, somewhere in there. These cars have become very popular in recent years, whereas in the very recent past they were nothing that anybody cared about. These started in 1973 with all of the GM midsize cars, and they ran until about 1978. We've seen these become popular with all kinds of media people like Police McFarlane and Roadkill having El Camino specifically, but this is just kind of a basic, honest one that I found interesting. And the next thing after that is yet another Colonnade car. This one is a early 73 or 74 Oldsmobile Cutlass. These 2 years were very specific as they had a completely different front end than what would come after it. What came after had a very boxy front end and not the single headlight setup this one did, and in my opinion got far worse looking. To be honest, I've always wanted one of these cars, specifically the early Oldsmobiles. I think are very interesting. Growing up, I heard stories about my father's first car, which was a Laguna Chevelle, which was kind of similar. 73, 74 were a 1 year only or a 2 year only car that was very interesting and different from the rest. So here's where we get to kind of the closing portion of the show. As you can see in the background, a lot of the businesses' parking lots started kind of emptying out. There were still a fair number of cars on the street, but it kind of got to be at the end of the day, and that was about all we had in us. I will say, this show was definitely bigger than the 2024 show. That show had an estimated 1,800 people there and about 5,000 cars. And looking at this show, it's similar to a bit higher of a number, would be my guess. Probably somewhere closer to the 20,000 people range. It was certainly obscenely packed at times, which is great for this show and great for the city of Ravenna in general. And we kind of saw people from all over. Couldn't name how many states I saw, and some license plates from other countries. A couple of Canadians made their way down. With that being said, the show was great, and we're looking forward to coming back next year. We would encourage everybody to come out next year. You can just Google Octane Nights anywhere, and you'll come to the website dedicated to the show. They don't have any information yet on 2026, but I can't imagine that's too far off with how big the show has gotten. We'd love to see the show expanded to be kind of a weekend event, because it gets very hard to see everything. We certainly didn't even get close this time around. And I would certainly recommend, if you want to make your way down, to plan to make it a full day event, as cars start showing up around 10 o'clock. And with that being said, we'd kind of like to thank everybody for getting to this point of the show. We're having a lot of fun recording these shows. We've been doing all of these things for years, but we decided to start recording them at minimum so we can remember what we've seen and done. But it's fun to share with other people as well, and we'd appreciate everybody leaving a like and subscribing to the channel, as that does help out quite a bit as far as getting these out there and getting them seen by more people. But with that, we will leave you to the next one.